Welcome again to the Living Word. But wait a minute. There's no need for me to say all this again. Listen. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Living Word, and to another interesting subject from the pages of the Bible. At this moment, I am demonstrating one method of using the subject for today, which is communications. As a matter of fact, I'm using two of those methods to reach you at this very moment. But before things get any more complicated, let us drop at least one of them. Yes, methods of communication may easily become rather complicated in this age of electronics. But if it were not for the wonders of science, we should not be able to communicate with each other as we are doing now. Today we're going to look at a few of mankind's struggles to communicate his thoughts and wishes to others, something it is all too easy to forget. You see, the very ability to communicate freely with one another is one of the special gifts of God to mankind. For no other living creature on this earth can even speak as man does. We still do not know to just what extent birds and animals can communicate with each other. A flock of birds will wheel and turn, or maintain a steady course for many hours, without any visible or audible message passing between them. How does the leader give his orders, or does he give orders? Or is it all a matter of instinct? The wild animals seem in the main to be dumb, so far as ordinary communication is concerned. But of course the expression dumb animals refers to their vocal rather than their mental limitations. The domestic animals perhaps have greater powers of communications, but no one is certain just how much one dog's bark conveys any meaning to another dog. Probably the animal with the most effective means of communication is a skunk. Neither man nor beast is left in any doubt as to his wishes. Seriously, though, I suppose it's a question of defense with the skunk rather than communication. Probably it is only man who feels the need for expressing thoughts to others. The most elementary mode of communication must have been by gestures, which may well explain why it is difficult for most of us to talk, even today, without using our hands for emphasis. Let anyone ask you for directions, and then you try to give them without pointing out the way to go. You will find yourself doing so no matter how often you've been told, mustn't point. And of course there are thousands of people today who are forced to use this method of expression in every conversation. With practice, they develop a marvelous facility of expression. Undoubtedly, the earliest spoken language was little like any in use today. The development of speech and of many languages is in itself a fascinating study. By this means, mankind learned to express thoughts and feeling, but must have at once found himself faced with several obstacles. One of the chief of these was distance. How could man communicate with his fellows who were miles away? You probably know that yodeling, now regarded usually as a form of cowboy amusement, was developed in Switzerland as a means of communication. Across these valleys the ringing notes carried from one mountainside to the other. But suppose there were no mountains, and instead only a dense forest. Here in Africa they developed another means of communication, by drums. There is nothing so typical of the African or West Indian night as the intermittent throbbing of drums. It was long a mystery to the early explorers and settlers in Africa how the native could transmit news faster than the European. In North America, the Indians found still another way to conquer distance. They sent messages by smoke signals. Other peoples used mirrors to flash the light of the sun. The modern form of this means is called the heliograph. In the British West Indies, one means of communication from one island to another is, in some cases, by heliograph. Another obstacle faced by man in his development of communication was the achievement of permanence. It is true enough that words, once uttered, can never be recalled. Their effect, for good or evil, goes on forever. But it is equally true that, once spoken, they are themselves lost forever. How was man to make his words, his message, last and endure? There are strange chiselings on the walls of cave dwellings which are probably an effort to make a message permanent, the records of a language that is now forever untranslatable. The earliest that is now fully understood is the cuneiform, a system developed in Western Asia. The hieroglyphic writing of Egypt was similar but less highly developed. Both of these are known as symbolic writing, for they are, in reality, the earliest picture writing reduced in size and to a definite system. In these systems, the characters came to represent syllables. To the Phoenicians is given the credit of inventing the first phonetic alphabet, by which each sign, or letter as we call it, represents a single sound. By way of Greece, then Italy, and so to Western Europe, this method has come down to us. Writing was at first done on clay tablets, and whole libraries of these have been found in the Near East. The Egyptians discovered how to make paper from the papyrus, a reed which still grows by the Nile and in the island of Sicily. The Chinese knew the secret of making paper for centuries before it was discovered by the West. And the making of paper from wood today forms one of the great industries of North America. The demand for it has increased rapidly ever since its use as a means of permanent communication was discovered. Between them, Canada and the United States are the greatest producers and users of wood pulp and paper in the world. By the means we have seen, man overcame the obstacles of distance and impermanence. There was still one more which challenged him, the obstacle of speed. Remember that the only way of copying a book was by hand. The painful writing of every letter with a quill pen meant that very few books could be produced in any given time. When the Bible first came to England, it was impossible to provide even one for every church. Today, many homes possess hundreds, even thousands of books. In the time of Queen Elizabeth I, a nobleman died and left what was considered in his day a tremendous library, 80 volumes. Only a wealthy man could afford so many then, and few could live long enough to amass so large a number. This, too, was after books had begun to be printed. Even so small a library would have been utterly impossible a century before. As far as is definitely known, the first printing was done by the Chinese in the last century before Christ. They used engraved blocks. It was in Germany that the use of movable type was invented. Johannes Gutenberg of Mentz is now generally believed to have invented this method, sometime about the year 1441. It was introduced into England by William Caxton in 1477. The first printing press in America was set up in the city of Mexico between 1540 and 1550. The first press in what is now the United States was established at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1638. The first article printed was the Freeman's Oath. The second was an almanac, and the third was the first edition of John Eliot's famous Indian Bible. Although all of this meant great strides in human communication, the obstacle of time was still there. The African drums were as fast as any other means yet produced. Then one day in 1844, a key was tapped in Baltimore, Maryland. Wires ran from there to Washington, and at the far end another key responded to the electrical impulse sent along the wires. What hath God wrought? These were the first words to be sent by telegraph, for that was the instrument used. The word telegraph means literally to write far off, and so far as communication is concerned, the telegraph has done away with distance. A signal can be sent around the earth in less than a minute. The telegraph has made distant nations neighbors and extended the influence of civilization to the remotest parts of the earth. But closer and more direct contact was yet to come. The electric telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell near the city of Brantford, Ontario, in Canada. The word telephone means to talk far off, and it has carried the human voice to a listener thousands of miles away with as much clarity as though the speaker were in the same room. It is now possible to dial direct from one city to another. The time required for the impulse to pass from speaker to listener is imperceptible, although thousands of miles intervene. Distance of and time have ceased to be. In more recent years, the advance in communications have been even more rapid and effective, thanks in great measure to electronics. The use of wireless telegraphy made it possible to transmit the electrical signals without the need for wires. In 1901, Marconi sent the first such message across the Atlantic from St. John's, Newfoundland. Next came the development of radio as we know it. The sending of sound, including the human voice, without wires. It was about 1920 that the first radio programs were broadcast and received in the homes of America. The practical linking of radio and telephone reached a new high during World War II with the invention of the famous walkie-talkie. This has now become standard equipment for hundreds of occupations. The police officer can be in constant communication with his headquarters. And taxicabs are directed by two-way radio, to give only two examples of the daily use of such communication. Much of the world's communication is now channeled through microwave, as the telephone becomes more and more free of the use of wires. Earlier I said that we were using two media of communication here, and one, of course, is television. You're too familiar with its recent development for me to say much about that. The other means was this tape recorder, first on cylinders, then on discs, and now on tape. Man found a way of giving his own voice permanence. But here, too, there is a permanent communication that merits our attention. Through the years, men have listened not only to each other's voices, but also sought to hear the voice of God. In this book, the Epistle to the Hebrews tells us that God spoke by his prophets and by many other means, but that the communication was always partial and often indistinct. Then, finally, he sent his Son, whom we call Jesus. For this reason he has been called the Word, for in him there is salvation from sin and the gift of eternal life, God's supreme communication to you and to me. Let me read. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. Therefore we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. How shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed unto us by them that heard him? Will you listen to the voice of God as, by the power of the Holy Spirit, he calls to you now, offering you peace, forgiveness, and everlasting life? And now, through his name, to you and to everyone everywhere, the Salvation Army sends its three-word benediction. God bless you. Join us again when we shall seek to learn more of the living Word, and of him who is, in very truth, the living Word. Amen.